Islamic State militants this week are defending their last remaining stronghold in Mosul with a seemingly endless supply of ammunition as Iraqi forces attempt to surround the ancient city with a major new offensive from the north. VOA's Heather Murdock has our report from Mosul.
Iraqi forces are amassed here at the northern border of Islamic State's final stronghold in Mosul. This new offensive marks a shift in Iraqi and coalition tactics after Islamic State militants' fierce defense of Mosul's old city stalled progress in recent weeks. Soldiers say they expect the beginning of the battle to be swift before they get into the denser population centers further in the city. But civilians say many families have been forced by the militants to move into these areas, and they fear large numbers of casualties. I'm Heather Murdock reporting from Mosul, VOA News.
And for the latest now on efforts to retake the old city, we are joined on Skype from Erbil in northern Iraq by VOA War correspondent Heather Murdock, who, as you know, filed that report for us from the front lines, and right here in Washington by VOA Kurdish Service broadcaster Khalid Fatah. I thank you both for joining us. Heather, you just got back from Mosul from the front lines last night. What did you see there, and where are you seeing the heaviest fighting?
Well, the heaviest fighting right now is clearly in one place. It's in northwestern Mosul, where yesterday 5 full divisions of Iraqi military forces and coalition forces began an offensive. Previously, they had been coming from the south up towards the old city of Mosul and other neighborhoods. Now they're pushing down from the north.
So the fighting is pretty fierce in spots. How are the civilians dealing with that? How are they faring?
Well, I understand about 1,000 families escaped yesterday, which is actually a small number considering the size of the offensive. The civilians that come out of these areas report very dire situations such that people are spending their last bits of money to pay for things like beads to eat because they're literally out of food and water, and there hasn't been electricity for a long time. Plus, they are subject to heavy aerial bombardments in advance even of the fighting on the ground.
Khalid, it's a tough situation there for civilians, but it has to be a tough situation for the soldiers and also Islamic State militants who are basically hunkered down there. How can those militants still be fighting 6 months after this operation? Where are they getting their supplies, their ammunition? Are they getting any help?
We should remember that ISIS, after they took over Mosul, they seized a large number of the weapon. Most of them, they were advanced weapon that the U.S. provided for Iraqi military. Also the cache, about like 70 to 100,000 soldiers was in Mosul. All these weapons fall in hand of ISIS. Also ISIS got weapon from Syrian military base. During these 2 years, they strengthened their position in Mosul, and they collect that.
So, Khalid, they essentially have a large cache of weapons left over from years ago.
From years ago, and been using. And we don't forget, in this situation, there are always kind of smuggling across the official borders from maybe Syria or Turkey or any other places. I mean, we can't forget that part of the way to obtain military equipment.
So there are still ways for supplies to get into Daesh fortifications. Heather, what I understand is the latest push for Mosul appears to have been launched from the northern edge of the city. Now, how much of the city's perimeter do Iraqi forces actually control right now?
Iraqi forces control the city of Mosul, the entire eastern half, the southwestern half, and then around the edges of the northwestern quarters. They're technically in Mosul city, and in some places they're actually in the city. But like, for example, I was with the Iraqi Army fighting in the northwest yesterday, and they were actually in more of the suburbs, almost even the countryside. While they were technically within Mosul city, they were just edging up to the urban parts.
Heather, are they at all getting close, or are Iraqi forces within range right now of the Al-Nouri Mosque, which, as you know, is fairly symbolic for Islamic State?
Well, in the south, they've been sitting fairly close to the Al-Nouri Mosque, within sight of the Al-Nouri Mosque for quite some time, for about a month even. In the north, there's quite some distance. I think that small area between the Iraqi front line in the south and the Al-Nouri Mosque is some of the fiercest held and most densely populated parts of Iraqi-controlled Mosul. So I believe, or any observer would guess, the idea is that if they come from the north and surround the old city, the most difficult part to take, they'll have a better chance of winning that ultimately.
You're right. And Khalid, that's a fairly important and significant site, the Al-Nouri Mosque, because that's essentially where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi essentially declared that he was a leader of this Islamic State Caliphate, right? What happens if Islamic State is unable to hold that particular mosque?
I believe the Islamic State leaders understand they will not hold forever that area. Iraqi forces, Iraqi government, and the coalition, they determine they have a final decision to repeal ISIS from Mosul and from entire Iraq. The fighters are there, they will fight until the end. This is who left behind in Mosul. They just wasting the time, or they trying in some way to still talk to the people, saying this is the Islamic State still existing, but they will fight until the end. This is how it looks like.
And now, Khalid, from your vantage point as a broadcaster for the for VOA's Kurdish Service, how do you see this battle shaping up? Are Iraqi forces winning? Are Kurdish forces winning?
Well, they are winning, but it's very slow pace. The Iraqi, this is the Iraqi decision. They have to have it. They have to end the violence in Iraq. If they are to reach that point, it's not the ISIS, the presence of ISIS. Maybe the stage after ISIS is more difficult. It's more challenging for the Iraqi government.
Heather, I wanted to ask you, because you've spent some time with them, with the Iraqi soldiers. How is morale right now among those soldiers?
I think morale right now is at a new high. I think the soldiers were getting bored and a bit depressed over the past month, where things have been not completely without movement, but the front lines have moved ever so slightly forward and back, and some units have had some actual neighborhoods that they've won. So the troops I was with yesterday, in the morning and the night before, they were incredibly excited. They hadn't done anything in 20 days in terms of fighting, and they were really happy to get back into it. In the morning, it was quickly depressed because ISIS was using heat-seeking missiles, which is not a new tactic, but it's more often deployed to go after their tanks, which is their front line, their first group that move in. So if their tanks couldn't move in, they couldn't move in.
They seem to be seeing an end in sight. Now, Khalid, the Peshmerga have made a name for themselves for their courage in battle and for their persistence. I'm just curious, though, for the Kurds, what's in it for them?
For the Kurds, it's security, defeating ISIS, defeating extremist group, armed group. It's very important. The Kurds suffer from these forces. They attack Sinjar, they attack Erbil. There were daily attacks on front line and Peshmerga lines. The security is very important for the Kurds. That's come in the first, and also the Kurds. It's trying to maintain what
it's their efforts. It's really keeping cities like Erbil, where Heather is right now, safe.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, my thanks to Heather Murdock and Khalid Fatah. We're taking a short break now, but when we come back, France is set to elect a new president this weekend. We'll take a look at where the race stands right after this break. This is The Correspondent on Voice of America.